Um, okay, so ontology of diagnostic criteria. Um, so, uh, so like first piece is like there is none, and like that's a cop out. So I'll like say actual things in a second. Um, the thing that I'm doing is continually like sort of like stepping outside of like all ontologies. So like I'm trying to treat the other person's system as sort of like radically like nebulous as my own. And so I'm trying to engage from a place of no preconceptions, you know, no method, no etc. Um, and you know what that looks like in practice is I'm sort of running the same like global wayfinding epistemics with respect to the other person that like I'm running on myself. And then the difference being that, you know, the medium, the channel, the feedback is you know very different. And so let's see. And then in terms of ontology, I do very much think in terms of something like twists in the system. So like I've had the experience of myself becoming like progressively sort of less and less like knotted or twisted, as well as like, you know, all the experiences that I've had along the way, um, uh, in terms of resurfacing memories and quote unquote trauma and um, uh, you know, latent and previous states like becoming activated, and just sort of like a huge laundry list of like all sorts of weird experiences that I've had in the course of my own practice. And so I'm taking all of that and doing my best to like extract like generalities and universalities that are sort of separated from my own contingent circumstances. And the more people that I talk to, like the more I'm like kind of able to effectively do that, you know, provisionally. Um, and yeah, and so kind of like my many protocol stuff, like in the document, like I'm trying to like make moves that are like good for both of us. So I don't know, that's like the short answer, maybe.
Um, are there like 3 or 4 questions you tend to ask? Actually, I guess maybe I'll find out some of them if you ask me. But yeah, if someone comes to you with like, say, my practice has a problem, are there less specific, like, you know, you ask specific questions about whatever content they're bringing, but I'm wondering, like, there's questions that I often come back to, and it's around the sort of stuff that we talked about last time around, you know, do you have some of the basic practice, what I think of as sort of practice pillars or like support things in place? Do you have things like that?
Not exactly. Like, so if I were to bluntly ask questions, it would be something like, you know, where are you at and what are you doing? Um, uh, and so like I usually don't ask those kinds of things so bluntly, because there can sort of be a like a closing off. Um, you know, people are guarded, or like self-protective, um, and are sort of careful about the kinds of things that they might expose. So like there is sort of like a trust building period. Um, so like one of the things that I try to balance is something like um, being being as direct and legible as I possibly can, because like legible is more likely to be ethical, while also kind of trying to meet the person where they're at with like appropriate kind of patient like indirectness or something like that. Um, so I mean, interesting frame. Like usually I'm less in the role of like kind of providing diagnostics, and the person goes off and does their thing, and it's just more in the role of kind of like dynamic kind of like constructive engagement, that where like some things like happen kind of in the interaction itself. So some portion of the people I work with like don't have a meditation practice yet, or don't intend to start one, and then other people are like very actively meditating, and there's sort of a deep unification or similarity in the way that I interact with like those two classes of people. Like in some sense, which is like all the same thing. Um, being very careful because like there's the whole like better not to start. If you start, better to finish. So like I try to be very very careful with people who in some sense like don't intend to start. So like there's a very careful line to walk there, I think. Um, so.
Yeah. So there's sounds like there's less talk about the past and the future, which is good. There's goods to that. It's good in that it's real. It's easier to get real. It seems like it could also cause like a context dependent thing where because we're different people with different like interactions. So whoever they are with you is going to flavor that.
Definitely.
Yeah, which is true of the other way of doing things too. Although it's an attempt to elicit like some of their interactions with other people.
Talk to me about the other way. What are you comparing like the things that I said to?
So the thing I mentioned at first, like asking diagnostic questions about their practice, I'm seeing that from the layer that you're putting on it. I'm seeing it as is like a more of a mind first thing because it's talking about their construal of the past and then extrapolating to their construal of the future.
Mm-hmm.
So more steps are happening. There's more steps of indirection. And it's made up for somewhat by the fact that you are hearing about a broader variety of their experiences. But yeah, it's highlighting the pluses and minuses of both, and that's interesting and useful.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, like there is like a sort of total causal history, sort of total light cone kind of thing going on. Like I'm thinking about how my interactions will like affect a person over like a 50, 60, 70-year trajectory or beyond. Um, the yeah, I mean, my second question was like, quote unquote, like what are they doing? Does that cover, like, does that cover the thing that you're comparing it to, or is there still sort of a different thing?
No, yeah, it often does. If by that, well, so it's easier people who are practicing because if they have a formal practice, that means that they got practice instructions from somewhere, and so they have something to repeat.
Yeah.
So that can be helpful. It can also be distorting because they are just repeating to you the words that they heard, even though they're maybe doing something different,
Right.
Slightly, subtly different. Yeah. So it's highlighting that for me, which is interesting. I want to be more aware of that nuance. It's tricky. The other question I had that's related before it drops out of my mind entirely. You use like an above average amount of hedging language, and I usually associate that with someone who's like worked with people who have trauma a lot. Because like I work with trauma people sometimes, everyone, but like more severe. And so I wonder if what your perception is of that.
Yeah, there is a way in which I think I do use more hedging language, do kind of qualify things, do like a lot of checking. Um, I think so. I think there's probably something there that's like a little bit stuck for me, or very stuck. Uh, I think there's probably something about it that is a little bit, at least a little bit. There I go again. Unresponsive to context and unresponsive to the particularities and needs or concerns of like the person that I'm interacting with. And well, okay. I mean, so that's like one part of it. And it's something that I'm working on. It's something that people have commented on in the past. Uh, the other part of it is like to the degree that it's not counterproductive, which I think sometimes it is. I think some people can find all the hedging like more destabilizing than sort of, you know, someone speaking with like utter certainty and like eternal whatever. Uh, is that I'm trying to do a thing where I'm like almost, well, it's like people have like sort of an epistemic processing stack where, you know, people are not just sort of, changes are not happening to a person's system like just because of the like propositional assertions that another person is making. It's also their body language and like, you know, timing down to milliseconds and tone and prosody and vocal fry and, you know, all sorts of crazy stuff. And so like I'm trying to engage like very carefully with people's kind of like epistemic processing stack, because one of the things, well, I think one of the primary things that makes things take longer for people in meditation is when they start doing a thing and then they sort of occlude or like forget that they're doing that thing. So then somewhere sort of like outside of awareness, there's sort of a runaway process kind of happening, that, you know, if left to its own devices, will sort of like tug the system eventually, depending on how big or fast it's going, in kind of like a weird shape. And so like I generally tend to try to interact with the person in a way that does not cause like sort of sharp occlusion or layering. Um, and I mean, you know, there's ways in which that's potentially like very managey, very paternal, very something. Um, that maybe the nicest version of that is like I'm just trying to be safe. And but then again, as I sort of said before, it's like being sort of hedgy and qualified can also like be destabilizing in its own way. So I'm like, you know, suboptimally walking some kind of tightrope that is maybe also like in the wrong ontology completely, and so that's like kind of the thing that I'm doing. Um,
Yeah. So the layering, at least one aspect of it seems like, I'm guessing in your experience, verbal overshadowing is kind of like a big deal. So people come and then they think this is the official thing, and then they think this is the way it's supposed to be, and they project that to some experience they're supposed to be having, and then they're in sort of wrong effort, wrong practice for like significant periods of time.
Totally, totally.
Yeah. Yeah, this is actually the most compelling argument for why I've heard it's uh, bad to talk about attainments or very specific phenomenological reports.
Yeah.
Where the Ingram crowd sort of thinks phenomenological reports are great. It sort of orients people to what they should be looking for. And so that seems to do something that some people find useful. Obviously, there's a bunch of people that are into it. But yeah, it's, I guess in your language that they're accruing technical debt for sure. And it's not clear that they're helping everyone then manage that later on down the road.
I mean, not necessarily. Uh, um, yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how people are kind of engaging with the lists or engaging with the maps. If, you know, it's sort of all about context or all about like presumptions that are brought to it. If if the maps are kind of, you know, handed over as like something like, you know, eternal and true and whatever, or it's like something about like a person's like brashness or confidence or something, uh, kind of somehow seems to imply that to like that the other person, then yeah, it's like they might really go looking for those things. Um, and then, you know, it's like if they're presented like gently, provisionally, person is kind of like clowning a little bit or like, you know, trying to take themselves too seriously or just a little hand wavy, then maybe the bet I'm making, which might not be true, is that a person will engage with that material like a little bit more sensitively, a little bit more provisionally, loosely, more searchingly. So yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah. And the other thing I just wanted to mention is that like I am relying a lot on my written material when I interact with people as well, because like not everybody reads that material or can read it, or wants to read it, or is in a place where like they have the time and energy to like try parsing it. But I do refer people back to the document a lot, and uh, the fact that it exists like dramatically changes like how I interact like towards people. Um, I typically try to keep the things I say to people and the document sort of synced, so that as part of my quest to like sort of obviate myself and not create too much sheer between in person versus text and a bunch of other stuff. So yeah. And so specifically that also changes like the power dynamics. Um, if if I never say stuff that's not in the document, then people, it's my hope that people don't need to like do special things to like sort of curry favor for me to me, or like try to get my attention or try to get special time with me. So like I think it makes things safer for everyone, and that was very very deliberate. Um, uh, so that like there's not some unique, rare, valuable thing that people can only get from me. At least that's the hope. It's just like it's all there in the document. Everything is what I've tried to do. So like I'm merely maybe an accelerant for some people some of the time, maybe, and if that fails, there's still the document.
Is that mentioned in the document?
Um, it should be. I think it's mentioned somewhere. If it's not, it's a terrible oversight. I think it is. I think it is. It's the document so long.
Under one of the cult sections.
Yeah.
There are several. Yeah. Yeah, and then I also wonder if in the document, I didn't see this, is there a place where you encourage people to try out reifying things like P0 through P9 for themselves? Because like you could reify them more, right? Like you could say, this is this practice and this is this practice and this is how to think of it. And that's what like a lot of schools do. And you do less of that. But I wonder if like there's the next step up the stack of like, yeah, try reifying it for yourself, because that can sometimes be helpful for you to have like those simple mental anchors for yourself.
Well, the mere existence of them having names and instructions, like that might be reification enough. Like, I do tell people to like, I do suggest that some people like just rewrite like big chunks of the document like in their own language, or they translate it into their own terminology. Ideally without loss of Kolmogorov complexity or something. So that's definitely in the thing. Yeah. I mean, I think I do the opposite more. I talk about like telephone games and sort of like unresponsive magical button pushing and stuff like that. But I don't say like, make it real, see what happens. That might be a nice balance. Yeah.
I mean, I've found that valuable for encouraging people to engage with certain practices that are sort of far outside their current like world model. Like, so for some people, like mantra is like just this weird thing, for instance, right? Like, how could that possibly do anything? And it's like, well, can we like find like a way you could hold this gently, where you could try it for a few weeks and investigate for yourself. Like, yeah, maybe there's nothing there for you. But also maybe interesting stuff.
If I've known someone for like something like 3 to 6 weeks, then I will like sometimes be like, just try it. Just do your best. Like figure out something in the space of what the words might mean, and then just like, I'm careful about doing that because of runaway something. But with particular people in particular contexts, like I do stuff like that very carefully and rarely.
Yeah. I wonder if there's almost So there's like a fear of accruing too much authority within their sort of model. So their homunculus of Mark winds up having like a lot of say over things, which then could like delete some of the like sensitive noticing.
Totally.
It feels to me like there's a thing where like the ideal thing, well, you know, ideal, asterisks everywhere. It's sort of like to get into this improvisational painting space together, where like maybe it's like this. Yeah. And so it's like, yeah, law of equal and opposite advice. So you see a lot of schools doing the top-down thing, and so you're just coming at it from completely the other side of like, just do like 20 paintings. Like, don't have that strong of an opinion about how they're going. And then like, yeah, we can like gently talk about like how you feel about the painting process and stuff. But like, I'm not going to be like, here's the techniques and here's the thing, and then sort of handhold you or guide you through like your painting by numbers over and over again until you see through the painting by numbers until like that's what like normal schools do. It's like totally. Paint by numbers like 20 times and then maybe you'll see through to the there's totally. This thing called painting that I'm doing. It's not just the numbers and the colors. Yeah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think it eventually becomes collaboration. I know for the first people I started working with, it's like first people started contributing preliminary auxiliary practices, and then people started like critiquing the document, and then people started offering critiques and summaries of like the main practices. So like there was sort of a progression of engagement with like the written material, and then yeah, I agree. Like the ideal is sort of like, you know, gently friendly, like fighty kind of riffing about, you know, and I do have that with some sort of like client slash student slash collaborators. I'm sure there's still something like much better there. But yeah, it's like, you know, ideally both people like feel safe and can take like risks and experiment and like kick things around. And yeah, I hope for more and more of that over time. And like there's some
Cool. Well, yeah, I dragged it back into conceptual land because it's just so fun. But there's other things as well.
Seems fine. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, like in this case, like, do you want to tell me what you've been up to? I, you know, I'll just note back for concept land purposes, like, you know, in limited cases, like I do ask people exactly what they're doing, particularly if they have like a strong, consistent, like personal practice, and they're, you know, like pretty secure about it. They're just like, you know, this is me, like take it or leave it, like just what's happening, you know. Then it's like, all right, okay, what are you doing? What are you doing? So like,
yeah. Let's see, what am I doing? I've been meeting with a meditation buddy because I've just noticed the like dropped sessions is like cut by like 75% with a person that you meet regularly. And so we meet like 6 out of 7 days a week, I would say. And practice has been pretty freeform. I mostly am noticing where the mind wants to go. Still a lot of getting lost in monkey mind. That comes and goes too. There will be periods where that's higher and periods where that's lower, but usually some sort of concentration that's usually focused on the body, sort of trying to balance attention and awareness in a TMI-ish sort of sense, until some sort of light jhana is attained, and then focusing on mostly somatic. So just noticing the pleasantness or whatever's happening in the body, if unpleasant things are happening too. And then there's bouncing in and out of that with like monkey mind. And then sometimes that goes pretty deep, right? So it'll reach like a relatively more spacious state. And then emerging from that, just watching carefully, right? So the mind is fairly, it's that sort of both relaxed and vivid or like taut state. And so at that point, it's just attempting to watch very closely the mind moments, like one by one, as they come through.
Okay.
And that usually goes for, sometimes I'll employ like a specific insight technique if it seems useful. So if the mind is starting to fall in the monkey mind more, then I might do something like noting. I haven't done body scanning in a while. What do I normally do? It's normally just mindfulness. I just try to watch closely. It might be with like a Dhamma factor as lens. Like usually I'm bringing in more structure if I'm sort of like too lethargic, and the structure like brings me back into something to pay attention to. So if I'm lethargic, then I might specifically pay attention to the unpleasantness of a sensation, or the changing, like how it seems to be changing, or if it seems to be moving. And then that naturally tends to stir stuff up, usually. And then I just do a little bit of like working with whatever gets stirred up. So if it's just like light memories, oftentimes they flash through really fast. If they stick around for a little bit longer, then I assume that there's something that is sort of snarled and needs to like get a little bit of attention. And there's either just sort of free form, just making space for it, or there will be, if it's very stuck, then I assume that something else wants to be included in that process of unsnarling that thing that's not currently in consciousness. And so then I do a CT-like thing with, pieces from like focusing on IFS2, but like mainly a CT thing where I'm diving in and we're like figuring out the motivation. It's like, oh, okay, the system has an objection to me unsnarling this somewhere. So let's bring that objection in to the same space and then see if they can sort of ideally somatically work it out, because that's just like faster than like all the mental proliferation that can go with like content like coming up. But a little bit of here and there mind. And then if they're able to achieve some sort of unsnarling resonance with each other, that will create usually some sort of positive experience. And I'll just sort of wallow in that for as long as it's present, just try to feel the pleasantness of that, to sort of get more of the system, more and more parts of the system sort of rotate and sort of see like, I guess I would call it developing the taste of purification, right? They're all like get on the same page of like, this is good, and we should like want to show up for this. It's not violent. It's not disregarding any of our stuff. Yeah, so that's like when it's going more structured. If it's going less structured, then all of that's interspersed with monkey mind and shikantaza. It's just like, okay, there was some sort of stream that wasn't clearly going anywhere, so I'll just relax back into space and see what happens.
Okay.
And that's usually how it goes. And then insight stuff has mostly been around non-dual things. So noticing ways in which the sense doors aren't separate. Are those the ones that have seemed most significant lately? Like other insights happen, you do insight practice and insights arise. But a lot of the time they're just sort of like fairly mundane insights, right? Like, oh, this part's doing this part's doing that. It makes sense. Like it's all legible to the mind. The more interesting ones have been, relaxing around dimensions I wasn't even conceptually aware of, or like the mind wasn't quite aware of, and it can't really get traction on it, but it's this something somewhere feels like it's loosening or opening. And I'm calling that non-dual, in that it feels like something is no longer separate, like some part of experience is no longer being pushed over to this side or something. Even this feels like a little bit of an excessive reification. Yeah.
right, cool. So like one of one of the first things that I do is like kind of check for how much a person is sort of doing like forcing and overriding and bypassing, and like how much their foot is sort of like unresponsibly on the accelerator. Um, and then I try to do sort of the careful indirect thing where like I try to like possibly offer corrections to that, or at least like plant seeds for corrections to that in a way that doesn't just sort of add more things that they're pushing the accelerator on and more things that they're forcing and bypassing. So like I'm always trying to like uh, help them remove epicycles or plant the seeds for the removal of epicycles without like adding even more epicycles on top. Um, and so one of the first impressions I have from the things that you're saying is like it seems like pretty chill, pretty patient, pretty gentle. Um, uh, there's like sort of a kind of a patient precision to it, and so like provisionally on face, like it seems like you're doing very well in that kind of dimension. Um, uh, usually, yeah, usually when I talk to people, sometimes they'll they'll be very clearly sort of forcing, pushing, bypassing something uh, for the people that do have like a pretty intense practice. But the levers like aren't immediately available to them for sort of relaxing those things. So it's like they're making a fist or they're pushing, but then like they put a pillow over like their fist or pushing, and they don't know how to like they've lost track of the fist. They don't know where the pillow went, and so there's sort of several levels of like finding the way back to like unclench the fist or stop pushing. So like broad impressions, it's like that like seems like pretty good models around that kind of stuff, as well as like not too much of that, at least on face, like in the system. um and so then the next thing that I do is something like, I guess there's like sort of a few different ways that I go from here. um at some point I would probably want to ask you something like what's happened before, because like uh you know like kind of like the one-dimensional map kind of thing. It's like you're in some regime right now, sort of, maybe it might be kind of an asymptotic like end game regime, or you know or there's like sort of more ups and downs like on the way. And so like by asking kind of what the major regimes have been before, I can kind of get a bit better of a sense of like where things are at. um and so like that's like one thing I might do. The other sort of like big thing I check, besides the kind of how much they're sort of gunning for enlightenment or something in like an unresponsive way, is sort of how loose their like current ontologies are or something like that. So like I wrote some things based on what you said. You said things like, these are paraphrased probably, like concentration focused on the body, balancing attention and awareness, but, especially things like attempting to watch very closely, um, your use of CT's core transformation, right? Just checking. Okay. Um, so when someone says like things like that, balancing attention and awareness, like employing particular techniques at particular times. Um, so one of the things I check for is something like, is there some process somewhere that's evaluating whether or not that's like the best possible thing to be doing? Um, and is there some process like sort of sculpting like the use of that tool? So like if a person is doing X, in this case where X is like something like balancing attention and awareness, um, is there a way that sort of before that happens at some point, or after it happens retrospectively, is the system kind of doing like error correction on that? Like, how did that go? Like, is that the best thing to enter into? So that's one thing. And then the other thing is sort of like a modulating process. How was attention and awareness going? Like, was there maybe like a bit of a better way to do it? So sort of like outside view checks on it, as well as like internal like modulation checks. And with that comes sort of like a general kind of looseness. Like, are they sort of holding all the things that they're doing like relatively loosely? And sometimes that is sort of like conceptual and aspirational, and that they should be doing that, but they don't really have the affordances and levers yet to sort of be actually loose with those things. And sometimes like those things really are like constructively labile, like constructively like loose and structurally fluid. And that's like a really good place to be. And so, yeah, so like, my first whatever for, would be something like, do those kinds of things sort of almost feel like they're refactoring, like as you're using them? Is there something about them that is like not slippery, but almost like, yeah, I don't know. I just say like refactory. Do they sculpt like in their very deployment or something like that?
Some parts yes, some parts less so. So it feels like what happens is there's rotation. So at any given time, I'll be sort of holding some of the parts of the process more constant, and then I'll be letting one part of the process float a bit more freely. At least I'm not sure that's totally true. That might be making it sound neater than it actually is, because it's actually a little bit messy. But it feels like that's the way the system inclines. So I'll go on sort of like week to month long mini cycles where, like, for instance, 1 month I was just reading all the concentration manuals and like poking around at concentration practice and like trying out being more strict with some of the things that are like reported by people to work, and listening to more talks, and writing down my own thoughts about concentration and sort of doing that, right? And then that will change a lot of things about my understanding of concentration. And then that will eventually sort of just naturally coalesce dry a little bit, or something. And I'll move on to something else. So I was doing concentration for a while, a couple months ago. Now it feels like the edge is more on the insight side of things. So on the emerging from the concentration, and like my practice changed, right? So like as the concentration changed, like, what do I want to say about that? Let's see. It feels like there is momentum, but instead of like a bunch of like pieces like all building up like momentum in the same direction, it's more like a piece builds a little bit of momentum, and I'm like, oh, okay, good, that's cool, like that seems reasonable, and then I'll move on to something else. And that, like, so if I'm moving on to insight, for instance, like, oh, I haven't looked at insight in a while, like I don't actually know what's there, and then I'll do some stuff there and it will sort of get like a little bit of like spinning or movement or something, and then I'll just leave it, and then I'll probably move on to something like integration. So I do tend to like, so for instance, the metastructure here of like that cycle between those three, that's a little bit tighter than any particular one. In fact, it was funny when I posted the infographic for that, people were like, the first thing people were like, wanted to do was like, let's run it in reverse. Like, I was like, oh, I don't even know how that works. I mean, sometimes maybe a little bit, but
yeah, I think I saw that. That was pretty funny.
Yeah. Maybe I should try it sometime. Just to, it's kind of like running backward through the jhanas just to see if you can. Totally. Yeah. That's actually a good example. That'd be like a more traditional example of what you're talking about. It's like testing out that flexibility. It's like, yeah. And then the other thing that tends to be inflexible is the Dhamma factors themselves. So like I do assume in my world model that like first jhana is something, and like maybe I don't know what it is, but like I just sort of assume it's something, and that if I'm confused, that's fine. I'm just working towards it.
Okay. Right. Okay, yeah, I'm sort of balancing between object level and general stuff. Okay, I'll come back to those things. Okay, so the thing that I might say here is something like, okay, so it seems like there's an endogenous sensitivity in terms of kind of which practices like you're doing when, and so like something changes about how you're interacting with the concentration such that like you move to insight or something like that. So there are feedback loops there, and like that seems good. Like something I might add there would be something like, you might look a little bit more closely like at the sort of conditions for switching. They might right now be like very, very good. I think so the reasons you're switching might be sort of a sense of kind of like usefulness like locally running out, or like some process like kind of slowing down, or it does seem like you're switching sort of before I use words like jam, or like slack gets pulled too tight, or there's grinding. So it seems like you're avoiding that, which seems really good. Um, the so one thing I might suggest is something like, you might be doing something like this seems like pretty good. It's like kind of running on its own, and it's like sort of handled in like a dynamic way. And then you kind of move to the next thing, almost like a plate spinning kind of thing, like lightly. Um, it might be good to examine like that sense of handledness or momentum kind of before you go to the next thing. So like if momentum is not always bad, like I'm probably using that in a way that'll lead some people to be like, oh no, momentum, must avoid, must make it into a thing and avoid it. Um, but there can be sort of a thing where a person kind of builds up some scaffolding, some fabrication or karma or whatever, and then they like cut over too soon or too sharply to like the next thing that they're doing. And this is sort of a more benign version of like they're like pushing really hard and then putting a pillow over it. It's like, it's like not too bad, but there's just some scaffolding left. Um, Before you move to the next thing, you might see if there's like some way in which uh, that like momentum, or in my words like scaffolding, might benefit from like a little bit more cleanup, or like leaving things like a little bit more neutral when you kind of move to the next thing. My suspicion is that as you're moving sort of through these sort of regimes, like at some point, like you may need to like kind of go back and like clean things up kind of where you've been. um and maybe not. And if you do, like it might not feel like this, but that's just the sort of the intuition I'm having. And uh, I think a lot of people will have to do something like this, and it's doable, and it might be sort of necessary. Like sometimes people don't have the affordance to kind of like hang out and kind of like clean things up. Like it's just, their system's off to the next thing, and like that's okay. But if you have that affordance, like it might be good to kind of explore a little bit before you move on to like the next piece. Um, and then let's see. Um, I could go on unless you have questions or comments or thoughts or.
No, that made sense.
Okay, cool. Um, just very concretely, I sort of wanted to. So this is this is like a little bit of a tangent, but it's like still like relevant to the whole thing. I sort of have like an axe to grind with like jhanas and stuff, as well as like moving between them. It's like a little bit of a tangent, but like it's maybe relevant. I don't know. Okay, well, so like okay, so tangent, like I have a whole thing around like altered states. So like I do think that there's something structurally special about the jhanas. Like I think there's something real there with like brains or like stages of sleep or something, or like how like the whole thing is set up. Um, I generally tend to, and I'm not saying you should do this, but just for the record, or whatever, I sort of tend to like nudge people away from the jhanas, and this might be contentious for like the classical contemporary Theravada flavored stuff, because just sort of in the spirit of right things, right time. I think that if a person sort of pursues like really carefully pursues like their own feedback loops, they'll pop into exactly like the right sort of flavor of altered state at exactly the right time, like when they need it, if they do. So like I sort of have this like, dual thing going on where it's like, you know, like clearly like something light or hard, like these like jhanas like pop out as like something about how the mind works. And then also like I think that structure like might be incidental to like progress on the path, in some sense. Uh, and so there's like a similar way in which, with respect to like we sort of mentioned like testing that flexibility, sort of being able to like, you know, like slam the gears or whatever, and like enter like any jhana or whatever. So first I'll mention that I've probably only spent like you know 20 minutes in like the first and second jhana as such ever. I just like kind of checked it out, made sure I could get into it, and then just like all right, this is a thing. So I'm speaking about this as a not having mastered them. So for whatever that's worth. The I'm so Daniel Ingram in his book, he has like a bunch of like models of enlightenment, including like the limited behavior and limited emotional range models, which he sort of holds up as sort of rhetorical straws. Um, I'm actually extremely sympathetic to those two models. I think that like all things being equal, uh, like those are sort of much more the point than all like the non-dual stuff. Um, so it's like not that people are you know rigid. You know, I talk about structural fluidity a lot, or like they're limited in some way, but it's like it's sort of positive limitation, where it's like people are exercising their possible state space like uh, they have full access to like their sort of like state space under kind of like bounded rationality and like uncertainty and stuff like that. So it's like, why spend time, you know, sort of being able to have sort of particular experiences or emotions or whatever, if like those sort of won't serve a person. So it's like I think the system does like, you know, try not to be too rambly here, I apologize. Suffering, for example, you know, I think all things being equal, like modulo surprise terrible things, like the system, you know, does like suffer less, and in some sense that is like limited emotional range. uh so like, and I think this happens for, you know, anger, hate, like a whole bunch of other negative stuff. uh and so, and again, like it's not the suppressive version where it's still latent in the system, like it's truly like metabolized, like burned off, whatever. It's like in some real sense in the limit, like just not there anymore. um and so similar with like preferences, where a person's preferences and behavior change, and there's some sense in which that's like limited, but it's like a constructive like limitation. You know, they don't want to like do X anymore, but again, like it's not self-suppressive. It's like can be very, very constructive, like you know, flamboyant, sexual, like whatever. It's just appropriate for like that person's niche. Okay, so bringing it back to the jhanas, like I don't think that a person sort of needs to be able to like jump between different jhanas or whatever, or that's like necessarily like a good use of a person's time. Anyway, okay, so that's sort of end tangent unless you have comments or.
Well, yeah, I can just share really briefly what I think jhana is doing. So I think that jhanas are good because they operate on two levels. So they operate on the object level and the meta level. On the object level, like the mind literally just does like chill out, and parts are like, this is good. Like we don't need to fight about this. Like we don't have to have different. It's like a very few of like why is going to the beach and being on vacation good? It's like, well, very few of your parts have a fight about that. Maybe you have one or two parts that like feel like you should be doing something, but like most of your parts are pretty cool with being on the beach, and so it feels more integrated. It feels more like more of yourself is like able to be active at a time. Everything feels more vivid, that sort of thing. So similarly with the jhanas, it's like, yeah, that's just happening. More of the mind's on board, and so yeah, it's just like feels nice. And you know, a happy mind is a good ally on the path. And then on the object level, on the meta level, it feels like what is being practiced is this dropping of fabrication, like dropping of overlay layers. So what you do in jhana practice, once you've actually started to build up some metacognitive awareness around it, so like initially it starts off pretty accidental, right? Like you keep trying, and sometimes you seem to get some of the factors aligned and something nice happens. But over time that builds in skill and you start noticing more and more details about it. And then what happens is you're doing this intentional construction and destruction thing, like additive and subtractive manufacturing. So like your current experience only has so much information in it, right? So let's take that bucket of your current experience and let's intentionally fill it with these same objects over and over again. And then like once you get okay at that, you can then like, okay, let's take one out and like notice what you're doing as you like take one out. And then it's like, oh, that was pretty cool. And then you like do it again. You like take out another one. And then, oh, it's chaos because you're not actually that good at it yet. But then you try again, right? Okay, put the same 5 things in the bucket of attention. And actually awareness too, it's more complicated than I'm making it sound, but we'll just stick with the metaphor for now. And so it's sort of this like practice of like taking things out of the current like fabricated like layers of experience. And then that winds up just being helpful everywhere else for like loosening. And so things like, and the way it's been reified in like jhana practice, I agree there's a bunch of problems with it. But just the practicing of dropping fabrication and being able to notice that that's happening, that part feels like why not reify it as a particular thing in this way. I would say my biggest disagreement, I agree with the tranquil wisdom insight meditation people, where they say, they actually don't even say this. I'm sort of combining it with Chuladas's thing. So calling them awareness jhanas is actually much more interesting than calling them light jhanas, because you know some people call it like hard jhana versus light jhana, like total absorption versus bodily awareness. But if we call them attention jhanas and awareness jhanas, so attention jhanas being the more traditional, oh yeah, like you get like extremely ridiculously one focused and then like everything goes crazy. If instead you have awareness jhanas where it's just like, nope, the whole body, just like it says in the Anapana Sutta, maintain awareness of the whole body and just keep noticing like everything that's happening. And notice those jhana factors or hindrances coming in and disrupting them, and then slowly pick them out, pick them apart, and they dissolve, and just keeps getting more pleasant as you dissolve them. And that's training the thing, right? It's training the defabricating. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah, there's probably a lot of positive and constructive nuance that I'm missing there. So like what you're saying makes sense. I should say, like, I do, in my long list of preliminary / auxiliary practices, like there are concentration practices, like these potentialities, like these are affordances of mind. These are things that the mind can do. These are degrees of freedom. And so, you know, some people will benefit tremendously from doing concentration practice. Uh, and it might be the case that everything that happens in jhana, like that all those things will happen in my system as well, but just in like a less sort of like overt way. Like all of the same things. Both practices might be completely walking the same territory. Yeah, and so like I just tend to be more down on it because I've seen like the behavioral rigidity and like self-suppression that can happen when these practices are misused. Um, and I've seen like how concentration can sort of be fabricating itself, where a person has to spend like hundreds of hours like undoing like weird concentration-y stuff that they did to themselves. So from what you're saying, like it sounds like there's sort of a whole world of like sort of safe, constructive, positive engagement with like these sorts of tools and practices. So like that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, I would guess that for most people, the things that I said don't actually link up to experience until after stream entry.
Fair.
Because before that, it tends to be more TMI like, and TMI feels pretty. I don't know what to call it. There's no like pithy summary of the error. It is related to some of the things you say about like tightening and too much overlay and all this mental detail and.
Well, it just seems like, even though it's based on classical practices, it seems like it's the wrong like, sort of basis vectors, where it's like building off at some like weird angle to like the natural grain of the system. I think other teachers have commented too that like yeah, it's like we can do that and get benefits from it, but then they're gonna have to spend like a lot of time undoing stuff as well. And then maybe people can't undo a bunch of that stuff until after quote unquote stream entry. So it's like there's building this weird object in the mind, which might be skillful means for some people and sometimes in places, but so I tend to think maybe that there's just like a more direct, nuanced, like straightforward thing that doesn't involve like the reification stuff. But I could be wrong. Like empirically, people might do better with my stuff if they do a little bit of concentration insight on the front end, and that's an empirical question like I'm still exploring with my small n. So yeah.
I mean, so rather than reifying the whole thing, you might want to try playing specifically with PT, because that's such a interesting. It's just like everything else, that when you train the mind over and over again to pay attention to something, it like learns that, and then also the detail starts increasing.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I'll be curious, like if we overlap with like students or collaborators or whatever, that you suggest some of this stuff to people in our common circles, because like I think for myself, like I'll make the extreme claim that there's like not that much left to do PT, to explore PT with, or something like that.
PT becomes very rough and unpleasant if you're actually like, if you've cultivated a bunch of stuff past it. Yeah.
Yes, maybe. Yeah. There's just like a lot of things are settled, and there's just like, I like both like don't feel constrained in any way, and also like there are ways in which like I have fewer and fewer like sort of degrees of freedom to kind of mess around. There's a whole lot of like just this, and it's like I wouldn't even like know how to mess with the just this if I like tried to, or something like that. Extreme loose claims like blah blah blah. I don't know. But yeah, but all this is possibly very useful for me, possibly, and very likely useful for people in our common circles. So we'll see what happens.
Well, yeah. So in our common circle specifically, like a lot of people, me included, start off like pretty in the head and numb to the body. Yeah. And so like any traction I can get with like, hey, do like a long yoga session where you really tire yourself out. And then when you're lying down in Shavasana, does the body feel good? Like just like any traction, or runner's high, right? Exercise or any kind of thing, like any traction on the, starting to notice those energetic phenomena in the body. And the same thing with focusing, right? So the rationalist community found focusing really interesting for I believe the same reason. It's like, wait a minute, stuff's going on, like a whole bunch of stuff's going on. Okay.
Yeah, totally. yeah, like a lot of my big list of auxiliary practices, like it's not well ordered, and like a lot of it is like sort of very cognitive, and people with my stuff like empirically like do eventually find their way to the body, but also like there's possibly like a much like there's possibly just like a better thing, um, and so like I have certain concerns about like going into the body too soon because it's maybe too top downy and it actually causes like sort of wrapping of the system, and like I try to like let people sort of be cognitive until they kind of pop out of the cognition like into the body, but like uh empirically and or theoretically like there just might be a much better thing here, so I don't know, your point is well taken.
It's, well, there's something like offering, like, yeah, there's the obligation versus opportunity frame or something like that.
Nice. I like that.
It's like, it's kind of like going around to the students who are all painting and being like, hey, like, so you've been painting with brushes because like everyone knows you paint with brushes, but I also have these like knives, you know, like you've probably seen like painting with knives. They're just there. And then like if a person naturally is like, oh, like, right, like it's just, and some people just ignore it because they're like, oh, that's too many degrees of freedom, like I'm already sort of at my limit with all these brush choices and things. It's like, okay, it's fine.
Yeah, okay, cool, I like it, that makes sense, okay, all right, cool. Okay, all right. Yeah, so I don't know, we could even, we've done a bunch of stuff, we could even sort of stop there. The places I would go now are kind of exploring more of like what's happened before, and then kind of like almost like insight diagnostics, like have you talk about some of like the insights you've had and like the order in which you've had them, and it's almost like a little bit like Keegan diagnostic flavor. It's like, how do you talk about them? Like, how long are the sentences in which you talk about them? Like, what's their feeling? So I feel like it's like it's a little bit of like an energy clash from like the place we just were to like me going like, hey, let's do this now. But like maybe
it's great.
Seems fine. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. What are some recent insights and or like what are some like crazy regimes you've been in the past, if any, and vaguely what order did they happen in? Or
crazy regimes, I don't even know. Oh man, so like I do have lots of notes, but I often don't bother to reify them into sort of stories. I have stories about some periods of practice, like there was like the 6-month yoga immersion, so like that sort of creates a narrative, but a lot of it's just the day-to-day insights. So like, yeah, like the first year, it was something like, wait, I can just strengthen the insight machinery directly and then I just get more insights. This is crazy. Like, how is this not a thing? And then, you know, just like every other Buddhist, well, not every other, but like at least the good ones, the Theravadins and some of the Zen people are like, yeah, insights are infinite. And you just eventually come around to this like, oh yeah, if I do insight practice, I'll have insights. It's like just not a big deal. So there's that aspect of it. And I actually really was drawn to Shinzen partially for this reason, that he had this frame of no big deal that he kept emphasizing along certain dimensions. And I think he was probably trying to poke at some of the same things that you're talking about looseness of, it's like, yeah, those experiences in the moment, especially, can be quite powerful. And you're just a little bit thrown or mind blown or whatever. But just notice that in the background, you also have this, this too, this is all, it's all part of it. Yeah, let's see, recent insights. I haven't had major ones recently. Mostly they've been emotional because I've been doing a bunch of CT work. So attempting to do sort of deep dives on conditioning that I assume is childhood based on the contents, right? Phobias, sex stuff, stuff about not being able to feel certain emotions in connection with people. And I've been doing that with my one-on-one meditation buddy, and it's been great. And those insights are of the form of like obvious or like, what even is that externally, right? Like, what's an example? Like the day before yesterday, it was like, whether or not I get benefit of the doubt was like a big thing or something. There was like, it's somehow entangled with like respect or something going on, like with socializing. I don't even remember exactly. Yeah, that was like 4 days ago though, so I don't remember it very clearly at this point. On the more like, contemplative side of things, I would say more noticing of, so like the stream entry insights are related to, or at least for me, they seem most related to a personality view. So you've seen Me Seeks and Destroy, the Rick and Morty episode where they create the little like blue creatures that have goals.
Yeah.
No. Okay. I found it like the best Dhamma in a fictional portrayal that I've ever seen. I always recommend it to people. But we're always spawning these little selves, these mini selves that are like small and they have specific goals. And that's fine, but by default we set them up in unskillful ways, right? They don't want to die, or they have an incoherent goal, or they're in conflict with other parts just intrinsically from the way they were set up. And it's just like, oh no, that's not a great way to set up selves. And then over time, noticing all of those unskillful ways that those are getting generated. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways that has only slowly sort of come into awareness has been the exact way that when a self is created or inhabited, its attention is very like, I would call it like schematized. Like its attention has specific shaped holes, and then it sees the world through those holes, right? So it's like it's a special shaped sieve and it only accepts in certain data. And so I sort of knew that before, right? I could talk about that cognitively before, but like seeing it directly, repeatedly, as like an aspect of the way, like this is what winning is for that part, and it's gonna look, or this is what losing is for that part, and so it's going to like orient, fear parts, right? It's easy with like a phobia. It's like you can just directly watch the pattern recognition system be oversensitive to a particular shape or a particular situation. And you can just see it in real time, like, better ramp up the CNS. It's like, whoa, what are you doing? Like, is that actually an appropriate action at this time? But it's like, or just seeing the fear object in context in which doesn't even make sense because it's that sensitive, right? You see I guess the parable of the rope and the snake is the classic.
Yeah, indeed. Great parable. Okay. This is really helpful. Yeah, I kind of look for sort of a combination of like, kind of like more mundane kind of stuff around relationships, emotions, that kind of stuff, as well as things that have more of a phenomenological field like kind of flavor. And it just seems very balanced. It seems like you're covering both. Like my yeah, so it seems really good. And this might be kind of getting into like the other people saying to you like, oh, seems fine, keep going. Let's see. Like maybe three brief comments. Like, I think with respect to like the insight is infinite thing, my suspicion, my steelman suspicion of why people kind of do the no big deal thing is not because insight is infinite, but because one, like those insights kind of keep getting refined and resculpted and whatever. It's like eventually lots and lots of stuff kind of finally comes to rest. But like, I think insights that people have, like if all goes well, are like kind of continue to be refactored and combined and recombined in like kind of an NP complete like kind of way. So like it's very, very sort of exhaustively combinatorial. Like the the ground is covered like again and again as like new things are brought in. Uh, and so like if a person is like sort of holding on to them too much, it might be like kind of as you said, like insight machine. It's like I will keep hitting that button, but then like that button pushing, trying to squeeze more and more insights out of like a particular process will tend to entrench like whatever that thing is they're doing, which will almost inevitably be like very partial. And that's like that sort of scaffolding they'll have to take down eventually. But it doesn't seem like you're doing that, so that seems really good. Okay, so yeah, okay. So two comments that I had. I was going to say this earlier. It's like core transformation, just as an example, or focusing, or internal family systems. I think you'd probably agree that these are sort of like leaky abstractions or application APIs, like kind of over the bare metal or whatever. But nevertheless, like they still constitute, non-dual, blah, blah, blah. It's like they're still the very stuff of the whatever. When someone reaches for a thing like CT, they are sort of presupposing kind of like a theory of mind or like a model of like how the mind works and what it is. And so like they'll sort of be interpreting phenomenology in a particular way, loosely speaking, based on that model. And so yeah, I mean, you know, loosely, gently, at the right time, maybe not now, maybe later. You might want to look at stuff like depth or like inside and outside, or like, kind of the non-dual stuff. It's like, where are you going when you do CT? Like, what are you traversing? Like, are there sort of chains of whatever? Like, what is this thing like at the end of the chain? Like, so like, just kind of beginning to question, which I'm sure you already are, just like what's actually happening there, and like, is there a less constructed thing maybe, which, when you say CT, you might already be doing that less constructed thing. So like, yeah, just kind of distinction between like kind of inner phenomenological space, or like, Daniel Income's like out of phase versus kind of like sensuous perception and, words. And okay, and then the other thing that came to mind is something like this may just be in the language that you might incline towards like finer and finer grain insights or something like that. Little saying like pixel is like very, very dangerous, or voxel. Like that's just, emptiness speaking or nebulous speaking, that's just like not a thing. But just like, what are the pixels doing, and like how do like pixels and voxels participate in insight, or like how does like finer and finer grain sensations participate in insight? Like little flickerings of muscle, or like little faint puffs of relief somewhere, like little things that are over the shoulder there all along maybe, but like you just realized it. Something about like dreams or reverie. How does reverie participate in insight? So this is very impressionistic and vibey, but just something about like continuing to like deconstruct like the very thing that the very substrate or subsidization of insight as such, or something like that. And for some reason I am saying these things because of the things you said. I don't quite know why. Possibly useful. Questions welcome, or I could just like kind of leave it there.
Yeah, so like the way that it's being engaged with is like a meta commentary. And so it's not just that there's this finer and finer deconstruction, it's this two-part process. So it's like the contraction and the expansion. So like, yeah, there's like zooming in on the pixels and then like doing things with them and like doing that a bunch. And like sometimes you find something that applies to a bunch of pixels and you're like, oh great, like this is like super efficient or something. And it feels like, those are the bigger sort of whooshes and purifications where it's like you fix a bunch of stuff at once and like a bunch of stuck pixels are now more free flowing. But then also like there's the zooming out. and it's like, oh, the big picture is kind of different, and so the stepping back feels different. Becomes like more like space. Like I think that's referring to the thing that I mentioned earlier of like stepping into a relatively less spacious state, not intentionally, usually, even whatever intentionally means. But then like noticing that there's some degree of freedom that there wasn't there before. Like, and that's what I sort of mean by like the big picture,
Okay.
I think. So there's that piece around that. And then so there's always tacit links. So if you're using any kind of structure, and especially like a structure like IFS, CT, things like that, yeah, there's like tacit link premises, or like it implies some ontology of mind. I try to view it more as like, it's like holding up a grid to a painting. So it's like the subnetworks, it's kind of like a more fine-grained version of so it's the same thing that they do in like CBT, where sometimes they give a person like an emotion menu because the person just doesn't know what to say. Yeah. They're like, yeah, it feels some way, and they're like, maybe one of like somewhat frustrating. So here's all these words related to frustration, and they're like, yeah, that one, like whatever it is, I can't think of any right now, but this is exactly why they have it. And you're like, yeah, that word feels closer. And that gives that part a little bit more traction for interfacing with whatever APIs other parts are exposing to be able to talk to each other. And so I view it as like, yeah, it's a particular API or ontology, but like it's for the subnetworks, not for whatever's going on overall.
Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah, it could be. You could be using these things in a very sort of karmically free way. My very faint intuition is something like, and this might not be the right time, is just like eventually you'll sort of deconstruct like those APIs as well. And then it's like, those will be things that you'll still have them in the sense that you can like talk about them coherently, constructively, and use them as for analogies and help other people use them in constructive ways. But it's like in some deep way, it's like you'll like like you'll no longer be using that as like an API. It'll just be like a useful thing to deploy for rhetorically and for other people. Maybe, or it's totally fine. I've tended to sort of, I talk about like the bare metal, which you might be engaging with, and I'm sure are in a lot of ways. Beyond tools, like that kind of stuff. Eventually, or not. The other thing, yeah, the other thing is like when you talk about taking a step back. This, and we talked about it before, this might be exactly the same thing or very close to like when I talk about the relationship between like locality and globality, where like, a person is like making changes locally, having insights locally, and stuff is coming up, and like eventually like that starts to happen inside of like a global context where it's like when the system is making changes locally, that is somehow like with regard to like the operation of the system globally. And I suspect that in my use of those two words, this has probably a lot in common, or homomorphisms or isomorphisms, to when you talk about like taking a step back. So that, I mean, that's interesting and possibly a thing. And if that's the case, then that, for what it's worth, it helps me to get a better sense of kind of where you are, which is like already maybe for having been for a long time, like in dialogue with kind of the global picture. And so like relatively more global wayfindy than not, which would not be surprising. And so like, that's kind of cool. So I'm like sort of putting you very loosely on like a map, maybe sort of. So like that's cool. That's cool. Cool. Well, I think that's all I've got right now. Like on my side, do you have comments, thoughts, questions, feedback, ideas for a future conversation. I don't know. Um, what's your take on why there's something rather than nothing?
Yeah, I mean, like there was some part of me that the first instinct, I think this is like, I have an urge to scaffold, but I just won't. But like, hi thing that's behind Mark.
Oh, wait, what does that mean? Oh, just like,
you know, like,
maybe I know what you mean.
Yeah, these are our ambassadors, you know, in a certain
Okay.
sense, and they're conditioned,
Fair.
but also hi.
Yeah.
It's like, hi, Shiva, I know it's you.
Yeah. There's all this stuff around like connection and intimacy and relating where it's like, holy shit, like people are so freaking different. And then it's like, holy shit, like that which gives rise to those differences is like the same across people, like at various levels of like depth, from genetics and nurture and development to like the Big Bang or whatever. And yeah, I don't know, that's like pretty crazy, where it's like, oh shit, like I can't connect with anyone ever at all, people are too different, and we're all in our own little virtual machines. And then it's like, oh wait, no, wait a second, like we're all kind of like arising from the same sorts of like whirlpools, and like there's a way to like reach across the gap. And so yeah, hey, how's it going? Yeah. All right.
Well, yeah, same as last time. Feel free to use the recording for anything. Seems fine. I don't think we covered anything that's like going to be of interest to China anytime soon, or NSA or anything. So
also my impression. Yeah, it seems like this will, and people are. I'll share some analytics with you. Like people are watching, and hopefully, like good things are happening. So,
all right. Well, I'll catch you online. Until next time.
Okay, sounds good. Until next time.